This is Mommying While Muslim, recorded live and unedited. Watch as Zeba and Uzma record their podcast, see their reactions, and find out for yourself what all the buzz is about.
This episode of Mommyingwhilemuslim is sponsored by Guidance Residential. Join Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, president of Zaytuna College and Guidance Residential, for a live webinar on how Islamic home financing is providing a permissible path for Muslim Americans to finance their homes. Register for very limited online seats at gr.link/MWM_NCW_Hamza HAMZA_YUSUF. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mommyingwhilemuslim. This is Uzma Jaffrey.
And this is Zeba Hassan. I feel like we haven't seen each other in a while, and I really, really miss you. How are you?
I miss you too. Yeah, I'm good. How's your week going?
You know, this is my first of all, today we're recording on a Monday, which is a little bit different than for us because normally we record on a Friday. So I was a little bit discombobulated. To
Good
be
thing you
honest with
remembered.
you, I'm glad I remembered. I was like, oh, yay, this is, you know why? Because I do my calendar blockings on Sundays and Mondays. And
I
so when I
see.
looked, I was like, what the heck? But yeah, it was the first time in I mean, almost 2 years that I had everybody out of the house. My husband's still at home, everybody, um, forever. And not that I'm complaining, but it was the first time that my kids were gone. And I have to say, I, house is sad. You know how when
Hmm.
you feel that energy?
Oh yeah.
You can feel the energy, good, bad, and the ugly, all the time. Like I'm a big believer that energy can actually be tangible and you can feel it. And my house was super sad that the kids were gone. And it was just so weird. It was such a weird feeling, you know, and I'm not complaining because I really want them to go to school. I want them to go to school in a healthy manner. We've talked about all the reasons and why
Mhm.
they should, but I have to say I really, really miss them, and I get so excited to see them when they come home from school. So, you know, I'm one of those weird moms that actually really enjoy my children and like being around them all the time.
Yeah,
And
mashallah.
I was, mashallah, and I was a little bit sad. But that having been said, I recognize and acknowledge that this is the best thing for them. So I am going to fill in the time with all the fun things and all the amazing things we have coming up on the
Hmm.
horizon. So
Lots of
look,
stuff cooking.
lots of amazing things, mashallah. So make sure you look at your newsletters. You want to be on our newsletter email to kind of get all the up to date information. Please go ahead and go on our website, mommyingwhilemuslim.com, and you can sign up for our newsletter, look at our socials. I don't look at our socials, but you make sure you look at our socials to see all the amazing things coming up. But I know you guys had a really fun trip this week. You want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so we did an impromptu visit to Legoland because we got the season pass, right? And it really does pay itself off in 2 visits. So this is our second visit and our first time staying at the Legoland Resort. And I'm not being paid. We're not being
Ooh,
paid by Legoland Resort. It
no.
actually is really fun. So if you have little kids,
Yes.
they have pretty good deals. The rooms, if you get a suite, can fit 6 people. So it's perfect for families of 4 kids like ours because they have like a bunk room, they have like the fold out couch, really ginormous master bed that I wanted to bring back with me. It was super duper fun, but the one thing I really liked about it, the first time in a long time, I think the first time ever with their kids, we flew to California. Typically we drive because it's just a 5-hour drive, but we flew. And as it turns out, it takes just as much time to fly as it does to drive because you have, all the get to the airport before, even though we had pre-check, all of that. And pre-check, guys, is a godsend. If you have minors, please get it. Now, what stunk is on the way back, pre-check, which means you don't have to take your shoes off. You don't have to take the liquids out. You don't have to take your laptop off. Well, at San Diego Airport, they made me do all of
Mm-hmm.
that. And they said any child over the age of 12 also had to take their shoes off. And so I have a 13-year-old, and so he takes his shoes off, masjid style, leaves them on the floor, and just walks on through the little metal detector thing. We're like, dude,
Oh my
pick
gosh.
up your shoes and put them on the belt,
You're
just
supposed
like
to
we used to
take
do.
them. Like, what are we doing?
I was like, you see, y'all are complicating things. Like, I paid $80 for the year so we wouldn't have to take our shoes off. My kid thinks he's in the mushes at the airport. So it was really, really funny. It just tells you how long it's been since they've flown, poor babies.
Oh my gosh. So he doesn't have, he has to get his own pre-check. That's anybody
Yeah.
over 12. That's why.
Oh, anybody over 12 has to have their
Anybody
own
over
number.
12. Otherwise, if you're under 12, then you can be with your parent,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't have to take your shoes off. So it's definitely worth it, especially as
Worth the
he
money.
is flying while Muslim and flying while Muslim and a
Mm-hmm.
boy. I
Mm-hmm.
would, take your own advice, Dr. Uzma Joffrey, and get your son his pre-check, because I do have to say it
Yes.
really, really does help.
It's a lifesaver.
It's a lifesaver. It definitely is a lifesaver. So I would do that, and he feels special because you have their little number,
KTAN
and
number. Yeah.
exactly. And the one thing I do want to say, and something we've started with our kids since we were talking about traveling, is that I started giving. I created frequent flyer
Yeah.
things for all of my children,
Yeah.
and I started doing that so they can have their own numbers, their own logins. So my hopes is, with all the traveling that we have done in the past, maybe not during COVID, they can have those miles kind of stored up, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe they can upgrade on their honeymoon or something fun like that.
Their
And
college interview trips.
exactly.
Yeah.
See, she's saying something like that, and I'm like, they're
She's planning for the grandbabies. I'm like, dude, one
I'm
step at a
already
time.
planning for the
One step at a
grandbabies. I don't
time.
know what to tell you because I'm trying to skip this whole momming thing and be a nannying thing. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I'm doing. But I am always interested to hear what our soapbox for the month is, and this particular one is something that we've been really trying to do for a while. So Uzma, why don't you tell us all what your soapbox for today is?
Yeah, so our soapbox for today is that we have been searching for queer Muslims for almost 2 years. You guys know we've gone on like every single platform possible to try to find our queer Muslims. We were actually looking for their moms because we're a momming podcast. We thought, how do we support those cis hetero moms like us who might have a queer kid one day, and how do they navigate those uncharted waters because they probably don't have a community they can talk to? How can we step up and be that community for them? Well, no one felt safe enough to talk to us, and we get it because Muslims aren't very gay safe. Really is the world. Um, we weren't very imaginative, but Zeba can elaborate on that later. I wanted to share a story with you guys about a time that I was in training. And this is just kind of to set up to explain why this was so important. And one of the reasons why my beliefs had to change, because, I am a physician and I do believe in science very wholeheartedly. And I consider myself an observant Muslim, and I'm very, like, I think my religion is perfect, really. So how did I reconcile my beliefs about queerness and science? Like how do I work these together? And I think that's like a huge issue that a lot of lay people have. So the story might help set it up. I remember being in training and taking care of a mom we'd been trying to keep her pregnant, but her blood pressure was just too high, and as you know, that can be very dangerous during pregnancy. So the baby had to be delivered a couple of weeks early. Mom in the meantime had been getting a lot of drugs to hold the pregnancy and keep her blood pressure at bay. And they were expecting a daughter. That's what they were told because mom had had amnios and all kinds of procedures because she had been a high risk pregnancy and she was Somali. They were a Muslim family. They came in, and my job was to catch the baby and to make sure when baby is delivered, then I'm checking scores. I'm making sure baby's all okay. There's no anomalies. And then, passing her off to dad. So mom obviously had a C-section because it was emergent. Baby came out. Everything was great. I'm cleaning her off. She's breathing fine initially. And then I see, I'm checking her genitalia, and she had a penis. Um, But as far as we knew, genetically, according to the genetic profile that was done, she was XX. Her chromosomes were matching up, but she had this penis. Now, what we think might have happened, and I think what later they explained to us in the NICU, because she ended up having to go to the NICU because she tanked a little bit after that. It was probably exposure to a lot of the drugs that mom was getting for her high blood pressure that this happened. I'm not saying, moms, if you have high blood pressure during pregnancy, don't take it. Please talk to your doctor. But dad was like super excited about his daughter, Muslim guy, and then he comes over and he looks at the baby, and I'm like kind of trying to hide, get her diaper on really quick, and he like saw and gets this horrified look on his face, looks at me, looks at the kid again, and then runs out of the delivery room, like he's gone. So I, out of the OR. So I quickly, cleaned her up, and then I handed her off to my partner, and I went and I chased dad, who's like on the phone, pacing in the hallway, like yelling into the phone in his language. And I'm trying to calm him down and trying to mime and explain to him, it's okay. It's okay. We're going to figure this out. We're going to do some ultrasounds. We're going to figure out what's going on. And he was livid and didn't want to touch that baby girl, didn't want to do anything with her. That was my last night taking care of her. And, from what I found out later, there was some reassignment that was discussed and surgery that was discussed for this child. So, my point in this is there's genetics, there is gender, depends on genetics, environment. It's more than genetics, I guess is what I'm trying to say. The XX did not preclude some gender ambiguity. And in fact, we know that 1 in 100 people actually has this kind of gender ambiguity sometimes. And that's just in the United States. I believe it's probably worldwide, but I'd have to go back and check the Nature article, which we'll cite in our show notes that says that. But um, it used to be that 20% of the time, these cases in the United States for sure, the doctor and the parents would just discuss what was easier to do cosmetically, and that's the assignment they would make. And they did a study of 14 of these people who were born XY, and they were reassigned as female, and 13 of them grew up later and were very traumatized because their whole lives they felt like they were male, but they had been assigned female. So it's not that gender and genetics hasn't played a role in harming people in the past, and we just don't want it to harm people again. And having taken some courses, I'm not an expert by any means, but taken some courses in gender, genetics, sex, and sexuality, they're very different things. And I think as lay people, we don't have a good understanding of them. I consider myself a lay person as well. And so, we jump to conclusions, and we don't want to hear people's sides. We don't want to hear people's stories. And, after seeing that father and his reaction to his own flesh and blood, his own child, I was a mom of two at the time, two little kids. And my soapbox is, I may not always be grateful for my kids, but whatever and whoever they are, they're mine. And I will love them through all the messy parts of our relationship. We say that as Muslims, we will accept and love whatever Allah gives us. It's qadr Allah, it's what He's written for us. Whatever He sends us, we'll be happy with. But do we really mean it? And I want us to answer that question in the dead of night at the Hajj time when we're waking up and praying for the things that we love the most. Do we really, really mean it when we say, whatever you send us, we're grateful for? DM us with what you find out. We're really excited to hear from you, anxious to hear from you, in fact. And that's my soapbox for today.
I absolutely love that. And I love that story because it really is something, when you're dealing with what is in front of you, you feel like that's your worldview. And then when
Hmm.
anything, it kind of um, makes you question, makes you look at something else, or the world is bigger than what's right in front of you. I personally feel like I'm getting goosebumps right now. It's part of your spiritual self renewal every single time you're given an opportunity by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to broaden your viewpoint, to think outside of what has been given. This is a sign from him to think. He gave us that opportunity to do that and to think for ourselves, which is why, as Uzma said, that we've been on this journey for a very, very long time. I think we've joined every kind of Facebook group, every kind of, reach out to the point where, people were thinking I was a lesbian. And, I was very flattered that I was getting all these DMs and emails. I
Attention.
was like, oh, I was getting a lot of attention. Okay. And as much as I'm like, sisters, I love you, but that's not my point. I'm looking for somebody to speak out on your behalf to let us kind of know what's going on. And, we're one of these people that we say that we're super, badass in a lot of ways. That's probably the first time I've cursed on the air, and
Ooh.
I'm just going to be honest about that. But we're activists who are addressing these deep-seated racism, otherism, and we're really, really, really trying to fight for the equality of all people in all places and spaces. And all those things that we say that we do, these ladies are on the front line providing resources to all those people and movements we don't have the time to join, even though we're trying, or the energy to really understand. And guess what, everybody? They just happen to identify as queer. So we are so pleased to introduce Shenaaz Janmohamed, a licensed social worker and community activist. She is the founder and co-director of Queer Crescent. Try saying that 4 times fast. That describes itself as a healing justice organization fighting for the liberation of its people and building networks of survival for queer Muslims, among many other things that we are going to be discussing on this episode. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shenaaz. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Alaikum salam. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Assalamu alaikum, welcome. So we are, like we said, super excited because even though we couldn't find the cis hetero moms, we feel like we were gifted something even better. So before we get into all of that, we usually kick off our guests by asking them about their mommying story, whatever they're comfortable sharing, and their mommying philosophy.
Ooh, I love that question. Yeah, so I have a little kiddo, 5.5, very rambunctious, who's home today since we're on a
Labor Day.
holiday. Exactly. So you may hear them in the background. And as you mentioned, I'm queer, and so the journey to become queer parents is a very intentional journey. My partner and I, we really had to labor, resource, pray to make our dream to be parents a reality. And we ended up finding a community member. My partner is Palestinian, so we found a community member who's Palestinian to be our sperm donor. And it's been a joy. It's, parenting, as you both know, it changes you. It shapes you. It tests you in the most profound ways. I think my parenting philosophy would be to really try to be child-centered, to really, so much of my work is shaped by my survivorship as a survivor. And so I think that at the root of that, we're looking at power. And so I think that really extends to my intention, my niyat as a parent, is to really examine power. And so being child-centered means that I am examining even the power differential in parenting. I try to be a leader for my child and not necessarily be like a decider or someone who is imposing on my child, but how do we really support our children by example, which feels very Islamic, and through leadership.
I love that. I'm of the unschooling philosophy, and that's very child directed and child led. And, it is really hard, right, to realize that these are creations of Allah who have their own agency and autonomy. And it goes against everything we were ever taught, like you are the property of your parents and they decide what's good, bad, or otherwise for you. So it is very different, but it can be learned. We can learn how to do things better. So I really appreciate that. Thanks for sharing. We do want to get into the meat of this. So tell us a little bit about your family background and your experiences as a queer mom? Like, what are you experiencing that's like us, and what are you experiencing that's different than us?
I imagine we're all exhausted.
That is true.
Yes.
um, Navigating I mean, I think that there's probably a lot more sameness than there is difference.
Yes.
For me, when I think about what sets potentially us apart, although um, I don't want to assume people's experience is, you know, the ways in which, as queer families and queer parents, queer people in general, really, um, systems of support have to be created, right? This is
Yes.
where terms like chosen family come from. And that also holds true for queer families. We have to create communities of care with each other, um, showing up to advocate in our children's school to ensure that things like gender pronouns become the norm, right? My kiddo has explored various different genders for a while. They were going by, uncle and Uncle Mano, and was assigned a girl at birth, but has really explored their gender. And we're my partner and I were very supportive of it. And it's a delicate line. You don't want to impose on your children. And so what does it mean to kind of just hold a space open, to be in curiosity with your child? um, but yeah, I think the piece around support feels the most salient. um, some of us have support from our families of origin, many of us do not. And I think particularly as Muslim parents, how do we retain our cultural practices, our rituals, um, through the experience of essentially being unmosqued? So we don't have a masjid that necessarily we can be together as a family in. And so, how do we create those spaces for ourselves? And we do that, and we do it beautifully. But there's a lot of onus placed on us to create those systems and supports and circles for each other.
No, I definitely appreciate it. And I'll just say this, I am not a queer mother and I'm also unmasked. And I also have to create
Mhm.
my own support system because like you said, if you don't have that around you, you're just gonna have to create it. And I would imagine that you making a conscientious effort to do that for your family means that you are creating the best for you. And there is a beauty in that, in something that you've created from scratch versus something that you've inherited. So I definitely can relate to that on multiple levels. And you talked a little bit about your journey. You kind of just hit it a little bit, how it takes a little bit of effort when you're a queer family to make the choice of becoming a parent. So this is not one of those things where like, in my circumstance,
Whoops.
oops, I took
I did it
I
again.
didn't realize birth control like antibiotics negated birth control. Sorry, my love. Like he knows this now. But yeah, so you had to make that choice, and how difficult was it for you, one, to make that decision to create a family with that intention, like I'm going, like you said, Nia, to create the family, and what were some of the obstacles that you had to go through in order to make that happen for yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I always wanted to be a parent. I always wanted to be a parent. I mean, to be honest, because I wanted to, impart like a very progressive. Um, I wanted to raise children and kind of undo some of the ways that I was raised. Very gendered. Elements of patriarchy and misogyny. I mean, my parents are quite progressive actually, but it's so pervasive. Um, and so I really wanted to parent and push myself to parent a free child. And so for me, that was never a question. Like my queerness never precluded me, or it didn't inhibit my dream of being a parent. To me, they're separate issues. Some people decide to parent and some people decide not to parent, and your sexuality really has no bearing on that. What does have a bearing is the resources that are required to become a parent. We jokingly say like straight people have sperm on tap,
Yeah,
you know, because you just, it's
we
right
do.
there. Um, right. And so that's the creativity that, you know, queer people um, can really have had to dip into, is like, okay, do I um, approach some of my dear friends who might be making sperm, who might have sperm? Do I go to a sperm bank? So there's lots of options. Do I adopt? Um, do I think about parenting in expansive ways where I parent kids in my community, right? Like they don't necessarily have to live in my household. So there's lots of fostering, et cetera. There's lots of different ways to think of parenting. And I think my queerness allows me to think really expansively about what does it mean to be a parent, to mother. That's beyond gender, beyond anything inside of my body to produce or reproduce.
I want to circle back. I appreciate that all the creative ways that you can parent, because, you know, not everybody who wants to be a mother or wants to be a parent has to birth a child. That we believe that very strongly here. You can even nurture and mother movements. Like, we absolutely believe that. But circling back to a little bit about your parents and your cultural upbringing, can you touch on that a little bit and describe kind of your journey to coming out and your parents' reaction to that, their support or lack thereof of it?
Yeah, so I was raised, I say I survived a little town outside of Sacramento. I was born and raised in Sacramento, and my parents are still there. My parents continue to, it's a pretty homogenous white neighborhood, middle class neighborhood. And my parents continue to be the only people of color on the block. And so that's been a challenge on its own. I have two older brothers. And as I mentioned, my parents are pretty progressive, open-minded. Ethnically, we're Koja, and so my parents were both born and raised in Tanzania, East Africa, but originally our ancestors come from Kutch and Gujarat, which is in Western India. And they came to East Africa as spice traders, as sailors, for economic reasons, right around the time of the British colonization. So, you know, my parents have experienced, my parents and my people are certainly like nomadic people, a sense of placelessness. My dad was in medical school in Uganda when Idi Amin expelled the Indians. So once again, they had to
Wow.
migrate. So there's multiple layers of kind of having to move and migrate and make and find home. And so what it meant that growing up in Sacramento, my parents, while I was raised very, like my mom is a very proud Shia, um, our community growing up was very kind of internationalist, very um, multiracial, a lot of class differences, Sunni Shia, and different sects within Shia. And it was really beautiful. And I think that that shaped so much of what I feel is possible within Islam. And so I say all that and I set that backdrop because it really seeded in me this cultural possibility of a Muslimness that feels very big and expansive. And then, you know, patriarchy is real. And so my day-to-day experience meant that my two older brothers enjoyed a lot more freedoms than I did,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the kind of body policing and the colorism, you know, being slathered with sunscreen and told not to sit in the sun are things that, you know, I experienced, whereas my brothers, you know, got to kind of explore the neighborhood and their friends, etc. And so from a
Get
very
tanned.
early on, exactly. And so from a very early on, you know, gender and being treated different, both as like a girl within my family, but then also as a Shia within a majority Sunni context and um, religion, it has shaped my understanding. Um, so I think that that produced like a little bit of a rebel inside of me, like resisting, pushing back, wasn't quite settled with how things were. My mom would say I was mischievous. And so I kind of lay that foundation because I think fast forward, a couple decades and a half later, I kind of came out to myself much later in life.
Mm.
I always, yeah, I mean, growing up, I was like, very precocious and kind of boy crazy, and got into a lot of trouble as a result.
Ooh,
Um, a lot of
I
trouble.
like here. Yeah.
Um, um, and so that my mom really understood that there was a part of my mom that really appreciated the wildness of my spirit, right?
Mm.
It was hard for her to really outwardly support that, but there was a way in which she enjoyed the freedoms that I really was grasping at, right? I think because
Mm.
she didn't get to experience them for herself. And so in this like beautifully like blessed moment where I had met my current partner and I was like told like my partner is Palestinian Muslim and is like my Muslim unicorn. And I was just
Aw.
like over the moon when I met this person. I just was like tickled. And so I couldn't wipe this smile off my face. You know how it is when you meet someone and you're like really
Mhm.
jonesing on them, like you just act like a fool. And so I go home to visit my parents. I live in Oakland. I go home to visit my parents. And my mom's like, "Why are you smiling so much?" Because I'm usually kind of like, a little bit of a Daria character, and I'm like grumpy and like. And so my mom's
We're
like,
gonna have
"Why
to
are
put
you
in our
smiling
show
so
notes
much?"
that reference for the millennial
Daria.
mamas that do not know who Daria is, but I love her.
Please do, please do. Um, so my mom's like, "Why are you so happy?" And I'm like, she knew. She's like, "What? Did you meet somebody?"
Mm.
And I just kind of smile, and I kid you not, she says, "What? Did you meet your Khadijah?" And
She knew.
Oh.
Oh,
for her to
Wow.
use a Muslim reference
Yes.
was, I mean, that's not her typical MO, right? Like
Mhm.
she and I were like, it felt like we had been transported and we were being offered this precious gift of like another possibility, another future, right? Where queer Muslims are thriving, and seen
Mm.
in the same way that all of us are seen, right? And she said that to me, and it was so meaningful. And what followed was a lot of struggle, no doubt. But
Yes.
I always had that moment, and it continues. I continue to struggle as a queer parent now. I really struggle with like how our family and my kiddo is essentially um, like a secret grandchild, right? Like not
Mm.
everybody
oh,
knows about and might not know that I'm, married or that, the extent to like the family that we have built. And so I don't want to paint this picture of like, it's all been so great. But that moment was really important. It was such an offering. It was such a blessing to have that moment to be able to turn back to, um, and to affirm what Fedwa and I, what my partner and I were building with um with our family.
That's you know, when you said that, I got goosebumps as well because at least that's something that you can kind of hold on to kind of help you as a beacon of light through the struggles that you inevitably face probably right afterwards and will continue to face on some levels. It's never going to be this utopian situation in any stretch of the imagination. And you talked a little bit about your Koja background, and I found it so fascinating when I was reading about it earlier about this migratory family dynamic and kind of moving around, kind of probably taking a little bit of everything that you've met and embracing some of that. How has that unique background set you up for queer? I can't even say it, girl.
you're
Queer
trying to alliterate too
Crescent.
much. Queer Crescent.
Queer Crescent. See, try saying that 10 times fast. That's hard. It's a beautiful name, but it's hard for somebody like myself to say that. But like, how has all of that set you up to start this it is a movement, right? To kind of help people within your community. Tell us a little bit about how your background, where you came from, actually did set you up.
Yeah, I mean, I think Queer Crescent, and you're right. I can't argue with you there. It's really hard to say that name quickly, but you
Too
Queer
know what?
fast.
It's
Crescent.
an
Queer Crescent.
invitation. You got it. But it's an invitation to slow down, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, Queer Crescent really joins a movement of other LGBTQI Muslim organizations um, that have been doing this work for a long time. Al Fataha being one of the first in the US, Masjid Arabia. There's a number of organizations really doing beautiful work to make space. And I think my Koja identity and that experience of um, moving, nomadic, either displacement or leaving by choice, has meant that you create community where in your surroundings, you find ways to connect, you listen to the folks around you, um, you enter with humility. Those are all the things that I strive to do when I build community. It's not about imposing on others. Um, and I mean, I think in some ways, like this interview is really special because being invited to be in conversation with two straight Muslim women, other moms, is quite unique because I think a lot of times we get really siloed in our different parts of our various communities. So we're all Muslims and we're all grappling with, globalized Islamophobia and surveillance state and, dot, 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 dot. And yet the conversation gets so specific to people who share our likeness. And so these opportunities to be in conversation, to see like we're actually pretty, like we have a lot of points of connection, more so than we have points of disconnect, is important. And so I just really appreciate the time to be on the show. But yeah, Queer Crescent was really formed in response to the Muslim ban. My kiddo, I remember nursing my kiddo. They were 8 months old when the 2016 returns came in. And I was just like, oh my God, is this for real? And so as my child is like growing and I had just come off probably like some parental leave and was like coming back into work and just saw like everyone else, all of our rights being eroded, so many communities being attacked by the Trump administration. Um, and I think, when the Muslim ban came out, it really compelled me to do something. Um, I had been working as a therapist and studying healing arts for about a decade. And so I really wanted to offer a space for people to be held in this moment. I wanted to be held. I was doing so much labor holding my child, mothering, and I really desired a space to be held as well. And so that's really what the Queer Crescent started as. It was a support group, twice a month support group, drop-in space for LGBTQ Muslims. And Queer Crescent has really grown from that. And I feel so proud of the folks who have created this organization with me and all that we have done in the last several years. It's really grown to be kind of a tiny but mighty force. And the possibilities feel really exciting ahead.
Yeah, I like that, tiny but mighty. And really, just looking at your page, the work that you do, the things that you write, the questions that you ask, are questions that we should all be asking. It's work that we should all be doing. And so when people are like, "Oh, something or someone is completely wrong because of their choices," it's like, okay, whatever you think, that's fine. But look at where they are. They're like ground zero doing that hard work that we only talk about. Like it needs to get done. But like they're actually the people that are doing it. And I saw them and then I researched them and oh, look, they happen to be queer. Like I there's just this relationship that we always see with queerness and activism, and I don't know if it's a function of, the oppression that queer people have to endure, and that's why they see the importance of activism. And those of us who have the privilege of being very mainstream, we don't feel that as much. But we say as Muslims, hey, we're oppressed people too, we're minority people too, but we're not willing to step in for other oppressed people unless they also look like us, unless they also live like us. And I feel like what y'all are doing is an example that we need to follow. Not the other choices in your lifestyle that you make necessarily. I don't know why people are like, oh, you have to be all or none. No, get on the street with them. Like, go protest with them, go march with them, go join the healing circles that they have, because we all need to share in that. We all have trauma that we have to overcome. And like you said, those are more points of connect that we have, rather than focusing on the differences. And our point in doing this whole month, which by the way, we're so grateful that you pointed that out, that it's discussing things doesn't mean that, oh, we're trying to sway people one way or another. No, we're just trying to open a door and say, listen, we're a community that has been surveilled. We're a community that has been banned. We're a community that has been, what's the word? Just we've been made the boogeyman. Can we really afford to splinter further, is our point. And we think the reason why we were able to be vilified so much is because we are so splintered along these things that really are personal choice. And I'm not going to sleep in anybody's grave but mine. So I don't want to answer for anybody's choices. I got enough crap on my plate. So that is kind of the point of why we did this, and why we're so grateful that you came on and agreed and felt safe enough to come on. And we hope that we do this conversation justice. Going back a little bit to the masjid and safe spaces, Zeba has talked about how we did a whole month in May about mommies in the masjid and how it's unsafe for us. But then you add, your community to it, and that's a whole nother thing. So are we going to remain affirming masajid and non-affirming masajid the way we are? Or, what is it that we can do better so that all Muslims feel like, hey, this is the house of God and I'm accepted here no matter what I do, because Allah forgives everything except for one sin, and that's associating partners with him, right? So how do we make it safe for all of our children to come in here and not feel like they're being rejected by their communities, by their God?
Yeah, I love that question. And to me, this is a question that the whole world is grappling with in some ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
the site that we're talking about is the masjid, but there is like a larger reckoning around power and
Mm-hmm.
who decides who belongs and who decides who doesn't belong. Which group gets to make the rules, and who do they benefit, right? And so for masjids to feel safe, it's like all of us have to be free. None of us will be free unless we're all free. And so when I think about like some of my friends who are divorced, or when I think of like hearing of stories of like working class Muslims, poor Muslims who haven't felt welcomed in a masjid, we have to tend to all of the parts of our community. And so it can't be this like singular effort to just focus on gender. We have to really look at it from a very intersectional frame. And so part of that is who's setting the culture within a masjid, who is able to impart on the programming, who is able to set the tone of what and the ways that rituals are carried out. Where is there opportunity for creativity in ritual making and sharing, right? And I think, sometimes because of the ways in which Islamophobia has really shaped us as communities, there's this protection around our experience, right? We have to we feel very protective of how and what images of Muslims look like. But the challenge is that we are pretty consistently, and maybe it's not we, but what is often offered up is this very kind of static archetypal image of a Muslim
Hmm.
that doesn't actually speak to the breadth of our community. It doesn't
Hmm.
represent the nuances, the folds, right? And it's in those folds and being able to express the nuances that we feel more freedom, right? It's quite constraining for anyone to feel like they have to kind of abide by this very rigid narrative.
Hmm.
And so when we can really widen that, examine that, and I think it also is going to require people who enjoy power, enjoy being a part of kind of normative Muslims, to give up their power,
Mm.
to pass the mic, to invite people in, um, to share in the experience of Muslimness. Um, it's like you can't talk about anti-blackness without talking about white supremacy.
Right.
Oh,
Similarly, we
right.
can't talk about not to conflate queerness with anti-blackness, but in terms of looking at it from a power dynamic, we can't
Perspective.
think about creating more queer inclusive spaces without really looking at the power of heteronormativity and
Hmm.
assuming a particular gender binary. That's what we have to be looking at, and that's what the conversation needs to be. Not necessarily let's talk to the queer people, though I'm happy to do so, but how do we
Right.
talk to the straight people? How do straight people talk to each other and say,
Yeah.
yo, this doesn't feel that inclusive?
Hmm.
How
Right.
am
Yeah.
I going to make a difference? What am I going to do to shift that?
Yeah.
By starting to have conversations like this. Like
Yeah.
that's the really why we wanted to do this, because the reality is Uzma and I get a, a lot more DMs than we thought we would
Mm,
about this, whereas there are children that are reaching out to us and they're saying we need help. I mean, and it really touched us in a way because they were like, we can't come out, we can't talk about this, where do we go to get, and honestly we didn't have the answers. And part of the reason why we started this podcast was we were on a quest to find the answers for ourselves, for our children, and our hopes was we're going to bring everybody along for the ride, whether you agree with us or not, because we never
Hmm.
say we're experts, but where we can
Never.
we will find the experts. But what we want right now is to know, how can we have supported those, other than saying, okay, go look up Shenaaz, go to queer. I need to stop saying
Queer Crescent.
crescent. I'm going to get it by the end, I promise. And other than saying that, what are some of the things that we can kind of either help moms that are suspecting of their children, or children where we can go? Like, if you wanted to come out, what are some of the steps? How can we help you? Because this is what we want to tell our community, right? When we started getting a little bit of pushback about having these conversations, and we're going to be real, you're perpetuating and you're creating something. No, no, no.
Fitna. Yeah.
They're already, it's already there. What we're doing is helping the people that need help. Having these conversations. I'm not going to turn gay.
Hmm.
Talking to you, Shenaaz, as beautiful
Yeah.
as you are, my love. I'm not going to do that, right? Like, that's just not how it is. And that's what I feel like we have to tell our communities. Talking about things doesn't make it come to it. If anything, it helps bridge those differences. And if we can help a kid, because a lot of these children are having
Hmm.
suicidal thoughts, they're depressed,
mm,
they're like, it's just a statement of fact psychologically. How can we help them? So what are some of the things that we as mothers, if we suspect like one of our children are, and to create an open dialogue with them so that they can feel comfortable coming out to us in a safe space?
yeah. When I hear that question, um, I think of my mom. I think of so many of my queer dear friends, and so I think that this is such a great question. I think, first of all, I would say, if you so there's a couple ways I want to answer this. First of all, if you have a child and you suspect that they might be queer or might be trans or might be non-binary or exploring their gender, find a place to get support. as the parent, as the mother, as the father, as the parent. So whether it's like your bestie, whether it's, an anonymous person, PFLAG, um, find a place where you can ask the questions, find out answers, talk things through. Because what I hear and what I've experienced is so many times the queer child ends up being the primary support for their parents' experience. And then the child, whether they're young or old or grown, they end up being in a supportive role. And they have their own experience that they are
Right.
trying to contend with, right? So I think that's the first piece is parents, find someone you really trust and talk to that person candidly about what's going on, right? I think also these times require bravery. Be brave and courageous, parents. Like the tone that you set within your community will really shape how the community responds. If you are kind of cowering and maybe ashamed or confused, and that's the energy you put out within your community, or maybe you kind of hedge talking about your kid, or you just kind of talk about all the other kids and just kind of, ignore, or like just avoid talking about that one kid, your community will
Pick up on
intuit
that.
the shame.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it will exasperate the shame, right? So what we need is for parents to really feel a sense of, is it scary? Of course. Is it new ground? Certainly. But the courage and the bravery that one can exude will really set the tone for how community wants to join that. There are so many people who are ready to and who are experiencing this in their own communities, and in their own families, that if we had more parents saying, yeah, my kid's queer and it's confusing and I don't know too much, but hey, here we are, just even that would make such a difference, right? And I think lastly, I would just say that your kid is the same kid. They're still going to roll their eyes at you. They're still going to love your food.
Yeah.
They're the same person. Like who they feel pleasure and excitement about, who they might have crushes on, how they want to articulate their gender is not the whole entirety of their personhood. It
Right.
becomes the entirety of their personhood when it is, to what you were saying earlier, Uzma, when it's an oppressed identity, right? Because when we feel oppressed and then we start flexing on that identity is one
Right.
strategy of coping, right? And so if we feel our gender is being invisibilized, persecuted, mocked, if our sexuality is being challenged, then we're going to make that part of ourselves even more emboldened. And so just know that there is so much more to your child than this part of
Yeah.
them. It's a significant part. So not to say to ignore it or kind of minimize it, but know that they're the same child that they were before they came into this part of their identity. So yeah, I mean, I think those are the pieces. And then for those who have young children, starting early in talking about gender is really important. As I mentioned, my kid is about 5.5. And from the very beginning, we have this really great book called What Makes a Baby. I'll make sure you all have the notes for that to link to it.
Thank
It's
you.
a great baby. I mean, it's a great book. And it talks about where babies come from and how babies are made outside of a gender narrative. So it's really about bits and parts and resources, and it's wonderful. And then we talk about the spectrum of gender, right? Like we have all been trained and raised within this very narrow notion of gender, boy and girl, right? It's a binary too. And it's dangerous because gender is such an expression. It's such a spectrum. People go in between, they play with it. And so talking to kids from a young age, you often see the way that like toddlers dress, right? Toddlers have the best fashion because they're
Yeah.
so wild. They'll wear like a
Yes.
tutu
Cape
with
and boots
cowboy
with everything.
boots. Exactly. And then like a soccer shirt, right? And it's because they are really embodying this like very limitless possibility of gender. And that's a beautiful thing that we want to protect. right? It's only through encountering our very rigid structures of heteronormativity and patriarchy and gender binary that we really start to see that imagination around gender getting smaller and smaller and smaller to one day where you feel like you have to check a box and you have to choose, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Uzma, going back to the story that you started with, it makes me think about all the amazing work that's happening within advocacy and organizing around intersex
Mm-hmm.
kids and intersex folks who are born with a variety of a mix of genitalia and how the ways in which that father responded, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I can hold compassion, but to me it's not, his response is so informed by ableism, right?
Right.
Ableism is this idea that certain, you know this, I'm sure, as a doctor, certain bodies are deemed as correct, and anything outside of that is seen as less valuable. And it's connected to capitalism, right? Because a less valuable body doesn't produce as much,
Right.
right? And so we have this very narrow understanding of what bodies are desirable and which bodies are not. And so starting that training, essentially that unlearning and relearning around gender, around bodies, and how varied bodies are and can be and express themselves is also a really it's a powerful antidote um,
Mm-hmm.
to dealing with patriarchy. Right?
I
So
love
th- so
all of
this
that.
no, I love all of that too. And I'm just going to be honest with you, like, as I am one of those that have a pretty narrow view of sexuality, and not that I'm not open to having these discussions, because I am, and I'm here and I'm 100% present. But I do, like you were just mentioning a little bit about this fluidity in gender. I just don't. Okay, so I am trying to understand, right? So you're explaining it to me as somebody who doesn't understand this, and I'm trying my best to do this, and I'm probably a majority of people.
Mm-hmm.
I represent a majority of the people
Yeah.
that are going to listen to this, and this is why I felt compelled to say it, because this
Mm-hmm.
is not a judgment issue. It's I've always knew I was a female, right? And a female who had multiple layers to myself. Sometimes I liked wearing makeup and looking pretty. Sometimes I don't, and I don't necessarily want to be put in a box of, and that's the beauty, and that's how I'm raising my children as well, to be put into a box that you have to do this one. And so, can you just be female and be like, I like traditionally male dominated things. I watch sports with my kiddos. I spend 90% of my time on on the basketball court and this and that. But I also like to dress up so this whole concept to me, as somebody who does have a more narrow viewpoint, right? I'm just learning a little bit about this concept of gender fluidity. How could you help me understand that when you don't have that definitive gender identity, that being more flexible in my thinking would be beneficial for my child that might have that more fluid identity of gender? Does that make any kind of sense, or am I just totally rambling for the sake of rambling?
No, I got you. I got you. Yeah. I mean, I think I want to start by kind of separating out sex and
Sorry.
gender as a
Mm-hmm.
starting point. So sex is, you know, the term that is assigned to you at birth, right? And so it's
Okay.
like people see bits and they say, okay, this is a female child. People see bits and they say this is a male child. People see bits and they're like, uh-oh, because of ableism, I don't know what to do here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And thanks to organizations like Too Cute to Be Binary,
Mm-hmm.
you know, more and more folks are learning about intersex and gender variance. So sex in many ways is a very kind of medical term, right?
Yeah.
Gender, on the other hand, is your expression, is your lived
Okay.
expression, it's your spirit, it's the way that you experience and interpret the world.
Okay.
And it's not static, right?
Okay.
It's not
Interesting.
static. It's for some folks, they have a really clear sense, like I was born in the wrong body. And so from a
Yeah.
young age, they've been a trans girl and they continue to be trans and a trans woman. And that's like a very clear, definitive experience of their gender. Someone else might play with gender and might have a period of time where they feel like a tomboy, and then maybe they, express their self in more kind of masculine presentations, and and then it might change, and so it's something that it can be dynamic, and I think the reason I feel a little bit like tripping over my words right now is because ultimately gender gets to be decided by the individual.
Interesting. Okay.
And so
So
I
it's whatever.
think
So the
that,
fact that I'm saying I feel female, I am female, even though
Is your
I
expression
like,
of your
it's
gender.
just it's an expression of my gender, but doesn't necessarily translate to my biological sex that I was born with. Correct?
yeah, so you would say, I'm a woman and identify as a woman, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you were assigned female,
Gotcha. Okay. I just want to
right?
make sure, like, because like you said, a majority of our listeners are going to be like me, that are just like, I am so confused with the multiple pronouns, and I want to make sure that I'm not saying the wrong things, and it's not from lack of appreciation or respect. It's more of, this is all new to me. Like the other day, my daughter always tells me, like, I feel like this Gen Z, they're woke in ways that we are never going to be woke. And I made the mistake of saying she, when one of her friends prefers to go by they, and then she was trying to explain to me the difference of that and why I am being offensive, and I'm getting defensive while I'm having this conversation with my daughter, feeling offense. And by the way, I respect the fact that, one, she feels like she can correct me. Two, I can learn something from my child, so I'm not above that. And three, we're definitely having more of these types of frank conversations around this fluidity of gender. So I am very thankful for you to correct me, because I am in the process of learning, and I want to learn, because when you know better, you do better. And so I really appreciate you kicking off our entire series, because trust me, we're going to have
Yes.
a lot of these types of questions,
Yeah.
because people like myself are saying, what is this whole concept, and
But
what
Adam
does
and
this
Eve. But Adam
mean?
and Eve.
Right.
Right,
There's always the
right.
Adam and Eve.
Well, good job, mom, for having the kind of
Trying.
relationship with your kid that they can challenge you. I mean, I think that's part of it, right? Is like the openness,
Right.
Yeah.
the openness, asking questions. I think really letting your kid, giving them the space to self articulate their
Right.
experience, right? Like, how many of us really got to do that as kids,
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, not at all.
And we all know that if
right?
you make something so taboo, like the kids want to do it more. So
Yeah.
if you're just open about it all, really, like I get a lot of flack from people in my family, even, that I'm so open with my kids, boys and girl alike. And I'm like, if I make anything so special that you have to be a certain age, then we'll talk about it. Then they're going to ask their friends and learn a bunch of junk. So I would
Yes.
rather they get it from me. And you gave
Absolutely.
3 very good tips to all of us, but I would say maybe, tip 1A is don't freak out. If
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
kids are coming out to you, say Alhamdulillah that they chose you to come out to. And I know when our kids do stupid stuff and they come to us about it, like our first reaction is to punch a hole in the wall, but just sit down, drink the water, lie down, do all of the things that our sunnah says, and listen and ask the questions first. Nobody's deciding anything that day. Nobody
Yeah.
needs to, but go through steps 1, 2 through 3 that Shenaaz talked about, and keep that channel of communication open with your child, because throwing away this person that you grew in your body, I just cannot wrap my brain around that. And it's hard, because I've asked other people to do it, like why can't you just cut this piece of your life out for something that has nothing to do with sex and sexuality. But, I get it now as a mom. It's like, it doesn't matter what my kid does, Like, I'm going to love him. I'm going to love her no matter what they are, what they choose to do, because at some point I'm not responsible for it, and what they choose to do is not a reflection of me. It's not a
That
reflection
part.
of my parenting, but them communicating with me and feeling safe enough to come to me, that is my parenting. And that's what I want to be a witness for me on the day of judgment, that I did not oppress a person. I certainly did not oppress my child. I tried to teach them everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants for them, which includes compassion for all people, no matter what they do, what they don't do. And it's something that I'm working on too. Like, I don't like stupid people. I don't like people who make stupid choices. But, politics aside, like, I think I'm going to fix what I can fix, and that's why I'm here, to learn and to make sure that we disseminate this information to other people who have created a boogeyman out of nothing. We all did it. We all did it. And it's only through experience and through hearing and witnessing other people and their point of view and their lived experiences that we can become more compassionate people.
I mean,
I think that piece that you just named is really important. Is that oftentimes mothers in particular are blamed, are seen as
if you were more righteous than your kids would
failed
be.
parents. Yeah. Oh my God. I've
Mhm.
literally heard my mom say that people have confronted her. Like, if she wears hijab now, but in the past she didn't. If you had been wearing hijab, your kids wouldn't have gotten divorced. My two brothers are divorced. Your daughter wouldn't be gay. So much onus and responsibility is placed on the moms. And so, I mean, I love your vision of like, drink some water, lie down. And I think some amount of freaking out, I just want to kind of expect it, and I want to normalize it. It's
Okay.
okay to freak out, but just know that your kid is not the one to freak out with.
Right.
yes.
Find that
So
other
we want
place
to be
and
the people you
person.
can freak out with. You can always DM
That's
us,
it.
set up a meeting with us. You can freak out with us. Totally opening the door to that. And that's really what we had envisioned initially. But, I think you're the best resource for us right now as a queer mom yourself. I mean, speaking from your experiences, I really think that we hit the jackpot. And I'm just so, so grateful that I was like looking at Queer Crescent's work and went back and found you. And yeah, cyber stalked and all that good stuff, but it was totally worth it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
And
it's been my pleasure.
and how, not that we're trying to minimize the intensity of our conversation today, but what we love to do is wrap up our podcast with, our minute, our rapid fire. We're going to set a minute on the clock. I think Joe's going to do that for us, and I'm just going to be like giving you questions, and Shenaaz, you have to respond right away.
First thing on your head.
First thing out of your head. I'd love to start off with this because Uzma and I are always looking for book suggestions. What are you reading right now?
Against White Feminism by Rafia Zakaria.
Yes.
What is your favorite word?
Shit.
Ooh, girl.
Oh,
okay.
okay.
I love that. What is your hidden talent?
Cooking, because I don't do it enough. So why do I hide it?
I love that. And this segues into this. If you had to eat one thing for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Coffee.
Oh, yes.
Does that
You
count?
can live on coffee. Yes, you can.
Yeah.
So, I love that we talked about your mom a little bit, but if there was one thing that you want that your parents taught you that you want to teach your kiddo, what would that be?
Generosity.
I mean,
That is, give with your right so your left doesn't know. Absolutely. Love it.
Right.
Love it. Thank you so much for this, Shenaaz. I know we're going to have a ton of questions. I know we're going to have a ton of DMs. We look forward to sharing them with you when we don't know the answers, because we're not going to know a lot. But we are happy to forward that on if you would entertain us in such a way and continue to be a resource for us. And we welcome you back on the show anytime you have something to teach or something to plug. We are really, really looking forward to forging a relationship going forward. Again, this is for all of our kids, regardless of who or what they are. We're here for all of them because, Zeba always says, when he cried mama, he cried for all of us, and we're all going to show
Mhm.
up. Like that's just, and if all of us don't, then the two of us will. We'll be there. So
We're always there. And quite frankly, we're going to bring you on for some non-queer conversations
yes,
because that you are
if
also,
you've heard our soapbox, we need you.
we are, you are also somebody who, has a wealth of information. So we look forward to those conversations as well. And in the meantime, everybody have a great week. And inshallah, we will see you next week.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Thank you both so much. Really appreciate it. Take good care.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Kadafis.
Hafiz. This episode of Mommyingwhilemuslim is sponsored by Guidance Residential. Join Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, president of Zaytuna College and Guidance Residential, for a live webinar on how Islamic home financing is providing a permissible path for Muslim Americans to finance their homes. Register for very limited online seats at gr.link/MWM_NCW_Hamza HAMZA_YUSUF.